Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I want to address the question that I probably get asked the most when it comes to books is, if I want to start reading adult fantasy, where should I start? And I want to give you some options today that may or may not be something already on your radar if you're not, in the fantasy community. I first want to start out by saying that if you haven't read the kind of go-to standards for fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, even Harry Potter at this point, I'm going to put in that group. If you haven't read those yet, I would never not recommend starting with those because they're considered the standards for a reason. So if you have already read them, but it's been like 20 years since you've read fantasy, these are still going to be great starting points for you. Or if you've never read anything fantasy, those are great starting points, but these would also be totally fine as well. So again, this is not like at the end all be all of recommendations. I'm sure that there will be people who are like, well, why didn't you recommend this? Or I can't believe you recommended that to someone who's never read fantasy before. But these just keep coming up when I make suggestions for people. And when I sat down to make the list, honestly, it just felt really easy to narrow it down to 3 based on what you might be looking for and what your preferences are. I think I kind of covered some bases. So I'll go ahead and get started. The first series I would recommend to someone who's wanting to dive into adult fantasy is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Mistborn Era 1 to be specific. Also, my copy of the first book is called Mistborn, but I think it's actually called The Final Empire. I'm not really sure what's going on with this copy that I have, but you can buy the books on Amazon in like a 3-book set. This book, have you ever read a story that just kind of blew your mind that someone is that creative? That's always me when the whole time I read this, I was just thinking, how did all of this come out of a human's brain? Like, it's so wildly creative. And yeah, it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. What makes this story special, I'm not going to do like a full review or anything like that, but what makes this book special is it has a really unique and a really well-explained magic system. It doesn't have a typical fantasy setting, so we're not dealing necessarily with like castles and kings and gray-bearded wizards and stuff like that. It's more of like a pre-industrial era type setting. So it kind of has, if you're trying to kind of stay away from fantasy tropes while you're easing into it, that is a point towards Mistborn. It has really good political intrigue. I guess I can put this down and put my clipboard back up. I brought the old handy clipboard back. What was I saying? So it has political intrigue. It has mystery and really good twists and turns that never feel cheap. He'll constantly keep you thinking, constantly keep you on your toes, asking questions, but he always comes back around to answer his questions, which I think is important because sometimes books can be frustrating in that aspect. But I think it would be great for newbies because it has really awesome characters. It has a cast and crew that's just like super likable. You would want to hang out with them and be a part of the crew. It has a kind of a heist story that grows into something much bigger in the next 2 books. The writing style is very approachable. So if you are, some people don't want to read a story that every now and then makes them go, am I reading a novel or am I reading poetry? This book doesn't have really flowery, flouncy prose. It's very economical and approachable, but it's still really good writing too. And the other good news about Mistborn is that if you like what you read, Mistborn Era 1 is the perfect introduction to Brandon Sanderson's greater fictional universe he has created called the Cosmere. And so if you like this, you're going to love everything else that is to come in the Cosmere, I'm sure. So this is a great starting point because there's so much more that comes afterwards. And it's just kind of a great way to dip your toe into something that can be really big if you want it to be. Okay, the next book I'm going to recommend and this probably won't surprise many people, is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. I said in about the last series that it wasn't a typical fantasy setting. Like if you wanted to kind of avoid some of the fantasy tropes, that would be a better option for you. This one is as fantasy gets. He really embraced all the tropes in the best kind of way, to the point to where it's basically a love letter or an homage to the fantasy genre. Another thing that makes this great for a beginner is the fact that it is a standalone book. Yes, it is a part of a series that has other books in it, but each book stands on its own well enough that it's nice sometimes to not pick up something that's huge and daunting. You know, with everything else I'm going to be recommending, if you pick up one, you're kind of in for the long haul because there's more books that come after it that it's required reading to finish the story to read the whole series. This one, you can read one book and get a whole story. Guys, this book is so fun. I always say I can't imagine who wouldn't like this book. And there are people who don't like it. I know who you are. But I just think it's so good. What you're going to hear when people talk about this book is how funny it is and how fun it is and how well-paced it is. All that is so true. It's hilarious. I mean, I was laughing out loud with this book. It is fun. It is well-paced. The action is well-written. But it's so much more than just those things. It also has so much heart, and it's just a really great story. And the characters are some of the best written characters I've ever read. These are people that you're going to want to have a beer with. And when the story is over, you miss them. I agree with what someone else said, that one of my only downsides to this book is that it was just one book. Like, I used that as a selling point, being like, oh, it's just one book, you don't have to commit to a bunch. But when it was over, I was like, I just want more time with them. One of the coolest and like most unique things about this book is that it has lots of 70s rock and roll references kind of hidden throughout the text, like little Easter eggs. So if you are familiar with 70s dinosaur rock, you're gonna find this fun, and it's just kind of neat to find them hidden. But if you aren't about that, or if that sounds weird to you, don't let that detour you, because they're very subtle. It's not going to be distracting or anything, but it is cool to kind of get that rock and roll vibe. Basically, it is a group of guys that were a part of a mercenary band, and during their time, they were hot shit. They were the best of the best, but it's been 20 years and they are all past their prime, but they have to get the band back together for one last quest. So guys, this has all of your fantasy races. It has, you know, kingdoms and castles and wizards and monsters and orcs and elves. Like, it has it all. And it is just such a fun book. So take my word for it. Do pick this up. Okay. Switch pages on the old clipboard here. The last series I'm going to recommend is a author that absolutely took my 2020 reading schedule by storm. He has written 7 books, and I read all 7 of them, in 2020, and that is John Gwynne. And I'm going to recommend his 4-book series, Faithful in the Fallen. This series is a recommendation for someone who wants an idea of like what is fantasy, what does modern fantasy look like right now? What kind of books are being written? What all is possible? If you've read a Game of Thrones and you're kind of wondering what should I read next, or you liked the show but you're not really interested in reading the books because they're not completed, I'm in no way saying that they're alike, but if you want kind of more of that gritty, dark, modern fantasy, but you want to start with something that's maybe not so grim or morbid, I think this is a really, really good starting point. This has all of the classic fantasy themes that I love, but it all feels very fresh. Kings, castles, prophecies, animal companions. That's always a huge selling point for me, is lovable animal companions. The world in it is really, really cool, but fair warning, this 4-book series is a little more, you gotta take time to chew this. So don't get frustrated if for the first half of this book, you're kind of constantly going, okay, that guy is whose uncle? Or what kingdom hates, why are they warring it? Don't worry about it, because it feels like a lot of information at points. It's a multiple POV style, so you're getting the point of view of lots of different characters, and it feels like a lot of information at first, but I promise you it's written really well, and it's digestible. You're gonna feel really comfortable with the layout and the story structure about halfway through, I would guess. But yeah, it has everything I love about fantasy, and the writing style is it's very clean cut. You're not going to get a lot of description. You're not going to get a lot of, a page and a half of just explaining what the barmaid's dress looked like. Which, by the way, I love that, but it can be a lot at first, especially if you're just trying to be like, hey, I want to challenge myself by reading outside of my comfort zone. You don't necessarily want to get thrown in with the most descriptive or over-the-top prose, and I think this is a good place to start. Like I said, any effort you put into the series, it definitely pays off, because the characters are incredible. The story is so good. It has really bad villains and people that, are good people but working for the wrong side. Like, it has all those character elements that I love. And I mentioned with the last ones that oh my gosh, you would want to hang out with these people or have a beer with them. This crew, I'm not trying to sound dramatic, but they will live in your heart forever. These people are, they mean something to me now, because John Gwynne just really crafted this cast of characters that felt so real and likable and lovable. So, yeah, epic battles, meaningful character moments, and the whole story is just very, very rewarding. So, there's more good news about this one too. If you like this 4-book series, there is a trilogy that's kind of a sequel trilogy that takes place well after this one ends. So if you want to spend more time in the Banished Lands, there is a follow-up sequel as well. So I wouldn't want to get you hooked on something and then not have something to recommend afterwards. And most of these, actually all 3 things I recommended, if you like what you read, there is more. So anyway, let me know if you want some actual non-spoiler book reviews for any of these that I recommended. I have not made reviews for these books, but I can point you in the direction of some really good non-spoiler reviews if you want more information before you pick one up. And then let me know what other type of list like this you'd like to see. If you want darker, if you're interested in grimdark recommendations, I can definitely make a video about that. But anyway, if someone just came up to me and said, hey, I noticed that you have a passion for adult fantasy, where should I start if I wanted to dabble and see if I liked it as well? And the answer, Mistborn Era 1, Kings of the Wild, or Faithful and the Fallen. Those are the recommendations you're going to get from me. So anyway, for all of my longtime fantasy readers, if someone asked you that question, what 3 books would you recommend for them? And what do you think of my recommendations? Do you think I'm crazy, or was this fair? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. And we'll be back to talk books soon, hopefully.